In this video, I'm going to talk about this brand new gaming monitor from Corsair, the XENEON 34WQHD240-C. It has a QD-OLED panel from Samsung with a nice 1800R curve, an ultra-wide Quad HD resolution, and a 240Hz refresh rate. So it is supposed to offer a great performance when it comes to response times as well as color reproduction. But before we check out what Corsair put together here and if this monitor is worth getting or not, I do want to quickly mention that this will be my first monitor review with extended HDR testing because we kind of updated our setup a bit since my last monitor review, and we got the Portrait VideoForge Pro 8K that together with Kalman software should give us way more data to talk about. So without further ado, let's just begin. In terms of design, I do think this is one of the nicest ultra-wides on the market, assuming that the white silver color will fit your setup well. The base is metal with a plastic finish around the pillar and on the back of the monitor, but the quality of that plastic is pretty good. It is height adjustable and you can swivel it and tilt it pretty well, but you cannot rotate it 90 degrees, which totally makes sense for an ultra-wide monitor. Also, you can VESA mount it if you prefer. Now, just like any other ultrawide, it does wobble a bit if you nudge the corners, but overall, the quality and the stability of this monitor is in line with other high-end OLED ultrawides on the market. You get a ton of connections in the back, including a full bandwidth HDMI 2.1, so you can run full resolution with a 240Hz refresh rate over the DisplayPort as well as HDMI. You get a USB-C connection with a 65-watt power delivery, and you get plenty of extra USB ports. I love that the connections are nicely accessible in the back, but it might not be the prettiest sight if the back of your monitor is visible on your desk, even with the cable management built into the stand. And you might need a bit more space if you want to wall mount your monitor, so please do keep that in mind. Corsair's OSD is nice and clean and very easy to use thanks to the buttons on the bottom, as well as a built-in proximity sensor that will quickly show you the location of the buttons as soon as your hand gets close, which is such a great little feature. The OSD itself is not as extensive in terms of options if you compare it to ASUS monitors, for example, but there are enough of profiles and different color options to be able to set everything to your liking. Unless you go for the sRGB mode that just fully locks a lot of settings, including the sharpness setting, so the whole display is kind of blurry and completely unusable. I'm not sure how this managed to pass quality control, considering that this is a fairly basic and a very popular feature. So Corsair did say that they will be releasing a firmware update for this issue, and the firmware is user upgradable, so this shouldn't be a problem in the future. The panel has a slight 1800R curve, and like most QD OLEDs, it is glossy. Now, that glossy finish does make the colors pop a bit more and look even better than on a matte panel, but if you have black or really dark images on it, a glossy panel can also reflect light sources and things in your room more clearly, which can be a very big downside if you have a light or a window, for example, right behind you. A matte panel tends to look a little bit gray in these situations, while the glossy panel just has these direct reflections. So, which one is better will totally depend on your situation and your personal preference. But let's check out some data. As I said at the beginning of this video, starting with this review, I will be moving on to Kalman for all my monitor testing, combined with the VideoForce Pro 8K. It is not exactly a cheap piece of hardware that you just want to get for home testing and home calibration, but it does give a lot more data that I will be using going forward. So starting with the default profile in SDR, the maximum brightness was 467 nits, which is both a good result and a typical one for these OLED panels. And as usual, it can only do this in smaller window sizes, dropping to about 294 nits when you set the entire display to white. And this also means that you will see brightness shifts in typical desktop work if you don't enable uniform brightness setting that just limits the display to 263 nits and keeps it stable instead. Now, it would have been nicer to see that number get closer to 290-ish finish nits like it did with the whole screen set to white, but it's okay and it is still a very good feature to have. In terms of color gamut, we got 99% of P3 coverage in SDR mode, which is a great result, and the color accuracy is good as well, whether we test a smaller number of patches or a much larger one, including some colors that are more difficult to display accurately. An average delta E of 2.5 is a nice result, and a maximum deviation of 4.37 delta E is completely fine as well. So this is more than accurate enough for creative work right out of the box, assuming you don't need that sRGB profile since it is pretty blurry and unusable at the moment. Since this is an OLED panel, the pixels turn off completely when displaying black color, so it has perfect contrast, or as Kalman shows, over 256 billion to 1. This graph also shows that the color balance is a little bit heavier on the reds and a little bit lighter on blues, and you can just about see a little bit of a red hue in the actual versus target boxes if you have a good monitor. But an average delta E of 2.3 is still completely fine. In HDR mode, I measured a 20/20 gamut coverage of 82.2%, which is excellent. A color accuracy with a typical selection of test patches shows an average delta E of 2.07, with two results showing a slightly higher delta E of 5 to 5.5. Now, these panels just lack a little bit of range towards the green end of the spectrum to hit a perfect result. If we test even more patches, the result remains very good. In my opinion, anything under a delta E of 3 is fine, and 1.76 is close enough to perfect. If we look at the stricter ITP standard, we see an average delta E of 8.99, which is a good result, but it shows that there is still some room for improvement. In a color match HDR test, I'm looking at some of the hardest but very important tones for a monitor to get right, like skin tones, for example, that can really look off on a lot of HDR monitors, even though they test well in other regular tests. And if we look at the color deviations without luminance error, we end up with a delta E of 3.27 and a maximum of 7.35. So there's also some room for improvement, but for this test specifically, that's actually a very decent result. And you can notice that in games as well. If we look at grayscale tracking, we see the same as in SDR, so slightly too much red, slightly too little blue, but it's reasonably balanced and shows a reasonable EOTF curve, which is in line with what you would expect from this panel. Peak brightness in the default HDR profile isn't too high, so you can swap it to another profile with a higher peak brightness if you want to see a bigger number, but in my opinion, the default profile has just a nicer balance overall. Now, if you mostly care about gaming, an OLED panel is a very good option because OLED panels have near instant response times and no significant overshoot. And this is also a 240 Hz model, while other popular 34-inch QD-OLEDs come with a 165 to 175 Hz refresh rate, so the moving image clarity is even a bit better here than on most alternatives on the market. The latency is similar to previous models I tested so far, ending up a 0.1 millisecond ahead of the Alienware. Now, if you only care about competitive esports titles, there are some faster options out there. But if competitive esports titles are your main goal, I don't expect you would be looking at ultrawides to begin with. Anyway, this panel shows the same flicker behavior as other OLED and QD-OLED monitors do, where the brightness dips on every refresh cycle. And this is something that most users will never even notice or really have to worry about, but there is still a small group of people that are a bit more sensitive to this flicker and might find all OLED panels uncomfortable to look at. So, if you find OLED TVs uncomfortable, this monitor will be the same. Viewing angles are also good, and there is no such thing as backlight bleed on OLED panels, so it doesn't really matter what you use this monitor for, it just offers a nice overall experience. The image quality is top tier, the gaming performance is excellent, and the color performance is very good out of the box, both in SDR and HDR modes. The only thing that should always be considered is burn-in. Now, Corsair is offering a 3-year-long warranty that does include burn-in, but It's an inherent weakness of all OLED and QD-OLED panels, which means that if you do use it for desktop use primarily, you may run into issues in a couple of years, while a typical IPS panel should normally stay good for much longer than that. So considering the fact that most of these OLED panels come out of the factory perfect, or at least near perfect, is that it becomes really hard for different brands to stand out, and at the end of the day, the price will determine which model makes the most sense to buy. In the US, this Corsair gaming monitor is currently selling for $1,200, while the Alienware goes for around $900, though keep in mind that the Corsair does have a faster 240Hz panel. But the Gigabyte MO34WQHD240-C, for example, has the exact same panel as the Corsair with a 240Hz refresh rate, and it sells for around $800, which is just a great price. Now, I haven't tested the Gigabyte just yet, but assuming that they didn't do anything unreasonable to the monitor itself, it would be the most logical option to get, in my opinion. Now here in the Netherlands, this Corsair is selling for about 1,350 euros, and the Alienware for about 915, and the 240Hz Gigabyte for 730 euros, which means that you can almost buy 2 GB monitors with the same panel for the price of one XENEON from Corsair. But prices do change over time too, and you can always keep an eye on some specials like Black Friday, for example. Previous Corsair models also launched with very high prices that went down considerably over time. But at the moment, the price premium is just way too high, to the point where I cannot really recommend getting it over some more reasonably priced options on the market. But price aside, I really do like this monitor as well. Corsair did a very decent job of offering something that does stand out a little bit. I like the design, the build quality is quite good, and the factory calibration is more than fine. It has all the usual upsides of an OLED panel, like good color gamut, great response times, and great contrast, so it is a very good option for pretty much everything, from fast-paced games to immersion games, from content consumption to content creation. And the main thing they really need to fix is that sRGB option in the OSD and the price, which is pretty much the biggest issue for this monitor at the moment. But if you like the way it looks and you find it on a very good special, or you just don't care how much it costs, just go for it, because this is a very good monitor to have. Now, that is all I had for today, but before I go, let's check out the sponsor of this video. This video was brought to you by Seasonic and their Vertex power supplies. These fully modular power supplies are extremely efficient and very quiet due to their fan design and their hybrid fan mode that stops the fans completely under 40% load. They come with a variety of connections for any kind of system you have in mind, including the 12-volt high-power cable for the latest NVIDIA graphics cards. And to wrap it all up, they now offer a nice and cozy 12-year-long warranty. Check them out using the links in the description below. Thank you all for watching and staying to the end of this video. If you liked it and you really like to see more content like this one, please do consider clicking that subscribe button so you never miss my future uploads. Bye guys, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!